For 6 months, the military's best shooters failed the same qualification. Tier 1 operators, combat veterans, champions, none could pass. Then a woman from base logistics asked to try, and what happened in the next 90 seconds made them realize why they never stood a chance. The mountain range facility sat at 7,400 feet elevation in the Colorado Rockies, carved into terrain so unforgiving that even the approach road required security clearance and four-wheel drive. This was where America's most lethal shooters came to prove themselves against conditions that broke even the hardest veterans. The wind alone could shift direction 3 times in a single minute. The elevation made every breath feel earned, and the temperature swung 40 degrees between dawn and noon. The qualification course had been installed 6 months earlier, replacing the standard long-range curriculum with something that seemed designed by someone who understood exactly how to make elite shooters fail. 5 targets at varying distances between 800 and 1,400 meters, each requiring a first-round hit within a 60-second window. The targets weren't stationary. The wind conditions shifted unpredictably, and the shooting positions forced body mechanics that made traditional sniper techniques nearly impossible to execute. In those 6 months, 47 elite military snipers had attempted the test. Delta operators with 20 years of combat experience and kill counts that remained classified, Marine Scout snipers who had worked in 3 different theaters and never missed a shot that mattered, a Navy SEAL instructor who held the record for the longest confirmed kill in modern warfare, a Green Beret who had qualified on every weapons platform the U.S. military operated. 47 attempts. 47 failures. Master Sergeant Julius Crane had watched them all. He had seen the frustration build in their faces, the disbelief when the timer ran out or the target remained standing. He had heard the muttering as they walked away, the theories about impossible wind conditions and faulty equipment and bureaucratic stupidity. Some of them came back a second time, a third time, convinced that with enough preparation they could crack the code. They never did. The course had a 0% pass rate, and Crane was beginning to believe it would stay that way forever. It was 09:15 a.m. on a Tuesday morning in early November when the woman appeared at the range checkpoint. Crane was reviewing the latest failure from the night before, a Tier 1 operator who had come closer than anyone else but still fallen short by 3 seconds and 1 missed target. The sound of boots on gravel made him look up from his clipboard. She wore faded cargo pants that had seen better years, a gray base-issue jacket with no unit patches or rank insignia, and a weathered cap pulled low over her eyes. Her hands were in her pockets, her posture casual but not sloppy, and she moved with the kind of economy that suggested someone who had learned to conserve energy in hostile environments. Nothing about her screamed military, but nothing about her screamed civilian either. She presented an ID card without preamble. Sarah Vance, Logistics Department, civilian contractor. The photo showed the same unremarkable face, the same guarded expression. Crane glanced from the ID to her face and back again. She looked to be in her late 30s, maybe early 40s, with the kind of weathered features that came from years spent outdoors rather than behind a desk. Her right eye was sharp and focused, tracking his movements with an intensity that felt professional. He told her this was a Tier 1 qualification course, not a recreational range. She said she understood. He told her there was a waiting list of Special Forces operators trying to get range time. She said she was willing to wait if necessary, but she would like to attempt the qualification today if possible. Lieutenant Beck, the range safety officer, had wandered over during the exchange. Beck was younger than Crane by a decade, less patient, and had spent the past week watching elite shooters fail in increasingly spectacular fashion. The stress was showing in the way he carried himself, tight and coiled and looking for something to push back against. Beck looked at Sarah's ID, looked at her civilian clothes, and made a comment about logistics clerks showing the hotshot snipers how it was done. The sarcasm was obvious and meant to dismiss her, but Sarah just nodded and said she would need to check out a rifle from the armory. Crane should have sent her away. Should have told her the range was reserved for qualified personnel, that she needed a sponsor and recent marksmanship certification, and a dozen other bureaucratic requirements that would have ended the conversation. But something in the way she stood there, patient and quiet and completely unbothered by Beck's mockery, made him hesitate. He told her to sign out a weapon and return in 30 minutes. The November sun was climbing higher now, burning off the morning frost but doing nothing to warm the wind that screamed down from the peaks. Crane used the time to set up the target sequence and run diagnostics on the electronic scoring system. The targets were simple steel plates 8 inches in diameter, positioned at distances and angles that seemed random, but had been calculated with brutal precision. The first target sat at 847 meters in a relatively straightforward position. The second was at 1,120 meters with a significant elevation change. The third, the one that broke most shooters, was at 1,380 meters through a gap in the terrain, where wind currents did things that violated the laws of physics. When Sarah returned, she was carrying a standard-issue M110 semi-automatic sniper rifle, the same platform every other shooter had used. The weapon looked comfortable in her hands, held with the kind of casual familiarity that came from thousands of repetitions, but her movements didn't advertise formal training. She could have been anyone who had spent time on a range, a hobbyist or a weekend warrior or someone who had taken a few classes at a civilian shooting school. Crane led her to the primary firing position, a rocky outcrop that offered minimal cover and required shooters to engage while partially exposed. The wind was already gusting hard enough to make his eyes water, and the range card he handed her showed wind speeds varying between 12 and 18 miles per hour, with direction changes happening every few seconds. He explained the rules. 5 targets, 60 seconds, no second chances. She studied the range card for a long moment, her eyes moving across the terrain with the kind of systematic assessment that suggested she was reading more than just numbers on a page. Then she did something that made Crane pause. She closed her eyes, tilted her head slightly to one side, and stood perfectly still. 30 seconds passed. Beck made a comment about meditation and wasting time, but Crane held up a hand, watching her with growing curiosity. There was something deliberate about her stillness, something that suggested she was processing information rather than preparing mentally. When she opened her eyes, the change was subtle but unmistakable. Her posture shifted, her breathing slowed, and she chambered around with a smooth efficiency that spoke of muscle memory built over years rather than months. She settled into a shooting position that looked almost casual, balanced on the balls of her feet with her elbows, tucked in a way that most instructors would have criticized as unstable. She looked at Crane and said one word. Ready. He activated the timer. The first target appeared on the scoring system at 847 meters, a steel plate partially obscured by a rock formation that forced shooters to thread the needle through a narrow window. The wind was gusting east to west, 14 miles per hour with eddies that could push the round 3 feet off course in the final 100 meters. Sarah made a micro-adjustment to her stance, exhaled halfway and fired. The shot echoed across the valley, bouncing off rock walls and fading into the distance. Before the sound had fully dissipated, the metallic ping of the impact reached them. The target monitoring system flashed green. Dead center, first round hit. Crane checked his stopwatch. 8.2 seconds had elapsed. Beck's expression, which had been hovering somewhere between boredom and amusement, shifted into something more alert. He stepped closer to the observation monitor, watching the replay of the shot on the thermal imaging system. The second target materialized at 1,120 meters, requiring a significant elevation change and compensation for a crosswind that had shifted 30 degrees in the last 10 seconds. Most shooters spent at least 20 seconds reading the wind, making calculations, adjusting their position. The ones who rushed usually missed. Sarah transitioned smoothly, her body moving with the kind of practiced efficiency that suggested she had done this exact sequence hundreds of times before. She fired without apparent hesitation. Another green flash. Another perfect hit. The stopwatch read 15.7 seconds. Beck was no longer watching casually. He was staring at the monitor, then at Sarah, then back at the monitor as if trying to reconcile what the data was showing him with what his experience told him was possible. The third target appeared at 1,380 meters. This was the Widowmaker, the shot that had eliminated more qualified operators than all the others combined. The target sat in a gap between 2 rock formations where competing wind currents created a turbulence funnel that could deflect rounds unpredictably. Experienced snipers with years of mountain shooting experience had spent 30 seconds trying to read the wind, calculating angles, making micro-adjustments to their aim. Every single one of them had missed. Sarah spent approximately 2 seconds looking at the target, then she fired, The sound of the impact came back across the valley like a bell. Green flash on the monitor. Perfect hit at the exact center of the target. The stopwatch read 23.4 seconds. She was almost 40 seconds ahead of the time limit with 2 targets remaining. Crane realized his hands had tightened on his clipboard hard enough to bend the metal clip. He forced himself to breathe, to maintain professional composure. But his mind was racing through the implications of what he was seeing. This wasn't luck. This wasn't even exceptional skill. This was something else entirely, something that suggested a level of familiarity with this specific course that should have been impossible for someone with no official record of attempting it. The 4th target appeared at 920 meters, but the catch was the shooting position. The angle of the outcrop forced shooters into an awkward kneeling stance that prevented proper bone support and made the rifle want to cant to the left. Most shooters needed at least 15 seconds just to get stable enough to attempt the shot, and even then the position was so uncomfortable that follow-through became nearly impossible. Sarah transitioned into the kneeling position with a fluidity that suggested she had designed the test herself. Her left knee found purchase on a flat rock. Her right foot braced against an outcrop, and her body seemed to mold itself to the terrain in a way that turned disadvantage into advantage. She fired before Crane could fully process the speed of her transition. Hit. Green flash. Perfect center. 1 second elapsed. The final target was positioned at 1,290 meters on an elevated ridge that required calculating bullet drop over uneven terrain. This was the shot where rushed shooters made mistakes, where the pressure of the ticking clock forced errors in judgment. The angle was deceptive, the distance was awkward, and the wind conditions at that particular spot were influenced by 3 different terrain features. Sarah looked as calm as she had at the beginning of the sequence. She made a final adjustment to her position, exhaled, and fired her 5th shot. The impact came back across the valley. Green flash. 5 for 5. The stopwatch read 38.6 seconds. She had completed the course with 21 seconds to spare, and she had not missed a single shot. The range fell silent, except for the screaming wind. Crane stared at the stopwatch in his hand, then at the electronic scoring system that was flashing 5 green indicators in a row, then at Sarah, who was calmly clearing her rifle as if she had just finished a routine training exercise. Her expression showed no triumph, no satisfaction, just the quiet competence of someone who had done exactly what she had intended to do. Beck finally found his voice, though it came out rough and uncertain. He said the wind patterns alone should have made what she just did impossible. He said nobody shoots like that without serious training, without years of experience in mountain conditions, without understanding terrain effects that took most snipers a decade to learn. Sarah slung the rifle and explained that the course was designed to test whether shooters could adapt their training to environmental factors they couldn't control. She said most people approached it like a standard range qualification, trying to apply textbook solutions to problems that specifically nullified textbook techniques. She said that was why they failed. Crane asked to see her service record. She said that wouldn't be necessary. Beck insisted, his voice carrying an edge now that came from watching someone violate everything he thought he understood about marksmanship. He wanted to know who she really was, what unit she had served with, how she had learned to shoot at a level that exceeded every Tier 1 operator on the base. Before Sarah could respond, Crane's radio crackled to life. Base Command was showing a qualification completion on Range 7, which should have been impossible given the course's perfect failure rate. They needed confirmation of shooter identity and status. Crane keyed his radio and reported a clean pass. All 5 targets engaged and hit in under 40 seconds. There was a long pause on the other end, the kind of silence that happened when people were trying to process information that didn't fit their understanding of reality. Then a different voice came through, older and carrying the kind of authority that made junior officers stand straighter even when nobody was watching. Colonel McCready identified himself and ordered Crane to secure the range immediately. Nobody was to leave. He was inbound with an ETA of 12 minutes. The radio went dead, and the silence that followed felt heavier than before. Beck asked what was happening, but Crane was focused on Sarah, noticing details he had missed during his initial assessment. The way her right eye tracked with perfect focus while her head movements showed subtle compensation patterns, the microscopic asymmetry in her posture that suggested injury rather than casual stance. The way she held the rifle, confident but different, adapted. He voiced his observation. She was shooting with her non-dominant eye. Something had happened to her left eye. Sarah confirmed it after a moment's hesitation. Combat injury, 8 years ago. Medical retirement. Beck was trying to fit the pieces together, asking how someone went from medical retirement to outperforming active-duty Special Forces operators. He asked if she had learned to shoot with her right eye in the 8 years since her injury. Sarah corrected him. She said she learned to shoot right-eyed in 8 months. She said that was 7 years ago. The implications settled over the range like snow. She had been shooting at this level, one-eyed and medically retired for 7 years. Which raised the question of why she was working in logistics, why she wasn't training the people who had just failed her test, why nobody seemed to know who she was. The sound of helicopter rotors interrupted the conversation. A Black Hawk appeared over the ridge, descending fast toward the range's landing pad, with the kind of urgency that suggested this was not a routine visit. The aircraft touched down, and Colonel McCready emerged while the rotors were still spinning, his uniform crisp despite the rotor wash. His face set in an expression that gave nothing away. He walked directly to Sarah, stopped 3 feet away, and studied her with an intensity that made Beck take an involuntary step backward. Then McCready spoke, and the single word he used changed everything. Captain, not ma'am, not contractor, not civilian. Captain. Sarah acknowledged him with a simple reply, and her posture shifted in a way that Crane recognized from 20 years of service. Military bearing reasserting itself, the civilian facade dropping away to reveal the officer beneath. Crane's mind made the connection. Captain. Medical retirement. Combat injury 8 years ago. The impossible qualification course that had been implemented 6 months earlier without explanation. The 0% pass rate. The way Sarah had moved through the test like someone who knew every inch of it. He said it out loud. The name that most people on base thought was a legend or a cautionary tale. The Kandahar Protocol. The instructor who had designed the most advanced sniper curriculum in U.S. military history before her observation post was hit by enemy fire. They had said she was killed. They had said the curriculum died with her. McCready confirmed that they had said a lot of things, most of them necessary at the time. He turned to Crane and Beck and told them that everything they had seen and heard in the past hour was now classified. They would not discuss it with anyone. His tone made it clear this was not a request. Both men nodded, too overwhelmed to do anything else. McCready explained that Captain Vance had designed the qualification course 8 years ago, 3 months before her injury. It had been created as the final test for a specialized unit that required shooters who could think beyond their training, who could adapt to conditions that nullified conventional techniques. The unit had never received approval, and when Sarah was medically retired, the course had been archived in a database where it sat forgotten until someone in procurement stumbled across it 6 months ago and implemented it without understanding its purpose or its origin. The course, McCready continued, was never designed to be passed by conventional means. It was designed to identify a specific type of shooter, someone who could read terrain and wind and environmental factors with an intuition that went beyond calculation. Every operator who had failed had done so because they had tried to apply standard sniper doctrine to problems that specifically defeated standard doctrine. Beck asked the obvious question. If the course was designed to be nearly impossible, why had Sarah passed it so easily? McCready's answer was simple. Because she was the only person alive who understood the actual methodology behind the test. Because she had created it to identify people who thought like she did. And because after 8 years of watching qualified operators fail her own creation, she had decided to prove that the test was not impossible, just misunderstood. He asked Sarah why she had chosen to reveal herself today, why she had broken cover after years of quiet anonymity. Sarah explained that 47 qualified operators had failed a test she had designed, and their commanders were using those failures to argue that the Special Operations Sniper program was fundamentally flawed. They were calling it a waste of resources, suggesting that modern technology and drone warfare had made precision marksmen obsolete. They were threatening to defund the entire program. She said she came to prove the test was passable. She said she never retired from caring whether the program survived. She just stopped wearing the uniform. McCready nodded slowly, and something that might have been respect crossed his features. He told her that the specialized unit she had designed the course for had finally received approval 2 months ago. Black budget, full operational authority, operating in terrain and conditions that required exactly the kind of adaptive thinking her test measured. They needed an instructor who understood the doctrine she had created. Sarah shook her head. She said she couldn't pass the medical evaluation. 1I regulations, active duty restrictions. McCready countered that instructor positions had different standards, especially for instructors with her specific skill set. He said the regulations were written for combat roles, not for teaching the next generation of operators how to think beyond their training. For the first time since Crane had met her, Sarah hesitated. He could see the internal conflict playing out behind her eyes. The part of her that had walked away and built a different life warring, with the part of her that had just shot a perfect qualification to defend a program she had created 8 years ago. She said she would think about it. McCready said that was more than he had expected. As the colonel walked back toward his helicopter, Sarah turned to Crane and Beck. She told them the course wasn't impossible. She said it just required shooters to trust their instincts more than their training, to understand that every rule they had learned had exceptions, and that the best operators knew when to break them. Crane asked how they could teach that to people who had spent their entire careers learning to follow doctrine. Sarah almost smiled. She said you teach them that doctrine is a foundation, not a cage, that the goal wasn't to abandon training but to understand it well enough to know when it no longer applied. That the shooters who had failed weren't inadequate. They were just thinking about the problem wrong. She handed Crane the M110, nodded once, and walked toward the motor pool where a supply truck was waiting. No ceremony, no grand exit. Just a quiet woman in cargo pants walking away from a moment that would be classified and forgotten by everyone except the 3 people who had witnessed it. Crane watched her go, then looked down at the range card still clipped to his board. In the margin, written in pencil so faint it was barely visible, someone had written a note years ago. Trust the wind, it's trying to help you. He realized the note had been there the entire time, written in Sarah's handwriting on the original course design, a hint left by an instructor who knew that someday someone might need it, hidden in plain sight for anyone who cared to look closely enough. Beck exhaled slowly and asked if what they had just witnessed had actually happened. Crane confirmed that it had. He said they had just met the reason the range existed in the first place, the reason the impossible test had been designed, the ghost that the military had declared dead 8 years ago. The wind continued its chaotic dance across the mountain valley, but now Crane understood it differently. Not as an obstacle to overcome, but as information to be read and respected, not as something that defeated shooters, but as something that separated those who could adapt from those who couldn't. Sarah Vance had designed a test that identified the difference between competence and mastery, between following orders and understanding mission, and in 90 seconds she had proven that the course she created 8 years ago was exactly what the special operations community needed, even if they didn't realize it yet. As the Black Hawk lifted off and the supply truck disappeared down the access road, Crane opened the range log and made a simple entry. Qualification completed, standards validated, course remains in effect. He didn't write the shooter's name. He didn't write her rank or her unit or her history. He didn't need to. Some legends were better left quiet, known only to those who understood what they were really seeing. Some truths were more powerful when they remained in the shadows, proven but not proclaimed. And some heroes did their best work when nobody was watching, when the only reward was the knowledge that the mission would continue and the program would survive. The range fell silent again, waiting for the next shooter who would try and fail and walk away wondering if the test was even possible. And somewhere in the logistics department, a woman with one good eye and a lifetime of quiet competence would return to her forklift and her paperwork, carrying a secret that would never appear in any official record, but would echo through the special operations community for years to come. The impossible range had been passed. The legend had proven herself, and the military's most lethal program had been saved by someone they thought was dead.